As I laced up my hiking boots and slung my backpack over my shoulder, I felt a thrill of excitement. I was about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime, a solo hike along the Appalachian Trail. I had spent months preparing for this trip, poring over maps and guides, training my body for the grueling terrain ahead. But nothing could have prepared me for the sense of unease that settled over me as I set out on the trail. At first, it was just a feeling of being watched. I would catch glimpses of a figure out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find no one there. I wrote it off as mere paranoia, the result of too many late-night horror movies. But as the days passed, the feeling only intensified. I began to notice strange signs along the trail, a piece of torn fabric caught in a thorn bush, a set of footprints that seemed to vanish into thin air. And then I saw him. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. He was dressed in tattered hiking gear and a backpack that seemed to be overflowing with strange and ominous objects. At first, I tried to avoid him. I would see him on the horizon and quickly duck off the trail, hiding behind a tree or a rock until he passed by. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake him. He seemed to be always one step behind me, watching me with an unblinking gaze. I began to feel like I was being stalked, hunted by some kind of supernatural predator. I started to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake, if I should have just stayed home and forgotten about the whole thing. But it was too late now. I was deep in the wilderness, with no phone signal and no way to call for help. I was completely at the mercy of this mysterious stranger who seemed to be haunting me every step of the way. As the sun began to set on another long day on the trail, I caught sight of him again. He was standing on a rocky outcropping, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was trapped. I couldn't escape him, no matter how hard I tried. And so I did the only thing I could think of. I stood my ground and stared him straight in the eye. For a long, tense moment, we just stood there, locked in a silent standoff. And then, without warning, he vanished. I was left standing there feeling shaken and confused. But as I looked around, I realized that I was alone. The mysterious stranger was gone, and I was finally free to continue my journey in peace. Or so I thought. As I turned to continue on the trail, I caught sight of a piece of paper stuck to a tree. It was a note, scrawled in red ink. "I'll always be watching you," it read. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was far from safe. The mysterious stranger may have vanished, but I knew that he would always be out there, watching me, waiting for me to make another mistake. I crumpled the note in my hand, feeling a mix of fear and anger. Who was this person, and why were they stalking me? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just some sick individual trying to mess with my head. But as I continued on the trail, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the mysterious stranger lurking in the shadows. As the sun began to set, I quickened my pace, anxious to find a safe place to camp for the night. I had been warned about the dangers of camping alone in the wilderness, but I had never expected to be stalked by a mysterious stranger. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw a clearing up ahead. It was a small meadow, surrounded by trees and filled with a soft golden light. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I had finally found a safe place to camp. But as I entered the meadow, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing, someone had set up a campsite. There was a tent, a campfire, and a small backpack lying on the ground. I approached the campsite cautiously, my senses on high alert. As I got closer, I saw a piece of paper stuck to the tent. It was another note, scrawled in the same red ink as before. "Welcome to my home," it read. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the mysterious stranger had been expecting me. I was trapped, and I had no idea what this person had planned for me. I tried to stay calm, thinking that maybe I could reason with this person. But as I looked around the campsite, I saw something that made my heart sink. There was a small handheld radio lying on the ground next to the backpack. It was turned on, and I could hear a faint voice coming from the speaker. It was the mysterious stranger, and he was talking directly to me. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You'll be staying here for a while." I knew I had to get out of there, fast. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back on the trail, gasping for breath. But as I looked back, I saw the mysterious stranger standing in the meadow watching me. He was smiling, and I knew I was in grave danger. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was sure I had left the stranger and his sinister campsite far behind. But as I finally slowed to a stop, gasping for breath, I realized that I was lost. The trail was nowhere to be seen, and I was surrounded by dense, unfamiliar woods. I was alone, and I had no idea how to find my way back to civilization. As the darkness closed in around me, I knew I was in for a long, terrifying night. The mysterious stranger may have been behind me, but I knew I was far from safe. I trudged through the dense woods, my senses on high alert as I tried to find my way back to the trail. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, and that's when I saw him. The mysterious stranger was standing right behind me, a sinister grin spreading across his face. I knew I had to act fast. I charged at him, determined to take him down. But as I tackled him to the ground, I realized that something was off. He didn't fight back. He just lay there, smiling up at me as I punched and kicked him. And then I saw it. A wound on his forehead, gaping open to reveal a hint of skull beneath. But as I watched in horror, the wound began to close, the skin knitting itself back together before my very eyes. I stumbled backward, shocked and terrified. What kind of person could survive a wound like that? The stranger sat up, still smiling, and began to brush himself off. "You can't kill me," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been alive for a very long time." I turned and ran, not stopping until I was sure I had left the stranger and his supernatural abilities far behind. But as I finally slowed to a stop, gasping for breath, I realized that I was lost once again. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, and I had no idea which direction to go. I was alone, injured, and being stalked by a supernatural killer. And then I heard the stranger's voice echoing through the trees. "You'll never escape me," he said. "I'll always find you." I knew I had to keep moving. I took off in a random direction, not stopping until I stumbled into a small clearing. And that's when I saw it, a small cabin nestled in the heart of the woods. I stumbled towards it, hoping against hope that I might find some safety within its walls. But as I reached out to grab the door handle, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, ready to fight. But it was just an old man, dressed in tattered clothing and sporting a long white beard. "Welcome, young one," he said, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "I've been expecting you. My name is Elijah, and I've been living in these woods for a very long time." I stared at him, unsure of what to make of this strange old man. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something there that gave me hope. Maybe, just maybe, I had finally found an ally in this desperate fight for survival. Elijah's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, as if he could see every fear and doubt that I had. But instead of judgment, I saw kindness and compassion in his gaze. "Come in, young one," he said, gesturing towards the cabin. "You're safe now. I'll protect you from him." I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I could trust this stranger. But something about Elijah's demeanor put me at ease. I nodded and followed him into the cabin. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, lit by a roaring fire that crackled and spat in the hearth. Elijah gestured for me to sit down, and I collapsed onto a worn wooden chair, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Elijah busied himself making tea, his hands moving with a quiet efficiency as he measured out the leaves and poured in the hot water. As he worked, he talked, his voice low and soothing. "I've been living in these woods for a long time," he said. "I've seen things that would drive a man mad if he didn't have the faith to see him through." He handed me a steaming cup of tea, and I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my chilled bones. "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. Elijah's eyes clouded, and he looked away, his gaze drifting into the flames. "I mean that there are things in this world that don't play by the rules," he said, "things that can't be explained or understood. And sometimes those things can be very, very dangerous." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized what Elijah was talking about. The stranger, the one who couldn't be killed. What was he exactly? Elijah seemed to sense my question, and he turned back to me, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "I don't know what he is exactly," he said, "but I do know that he's not human. Not anymore, at least." I felt a wave of fear wash over me, and I set my tea down, my hands shaking. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elijah's face was grim, and his voice was low and serious. "I mean that he's been altered," he said, "changed in some fundamental way. And now he's not like us anymore. He's something else." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the implications of what Elijah was saying. The stranger, the one who couldn't be killed. What was he exactly? And what did he want from me? Elijah's words hung in the air, leaving me with more questions than answers. I felt a sense of unease, as if I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. "What does he want from me?" I asked Elijah, my voice shaking. Elijah's expression was grim. "I don't know," he said, "but I think it's connected to the trail. He's been following you, waiting for you to, I don't know, to make a mistake, maybe." I thought back to the strange occurrences on the trail, the feeling of being watched, the eerie sense of unease. It all made sense now. The stranger had been stalking me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "But why?" I asked Elijah, frustration and fear etched on my face. Elijah shrugged. "I don't know," he repeated, "but I think it's connected to the trail's history. There are stories about this trail, about the people who have disappeared on it over the years." I felt a chill run down my spine. Disappearances? What was Elijah talking about? "What stories?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Elijah leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are stories about the trail being cursed," he said, "about people who venture on it never returning. Some say it's the work of a malevolent spirit, one that preys on the living." I felt a shiver run down my spine. A curse? A malevolent spirit? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. But Elijah's expression was dead serious. "I believe it," he said. "I've seen things on this trail that I can't explain. Things that have made me question my own sanity." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss Elijah's stories as mere superstition, but another part of me was terrified that they might be true. As I sat there, frozen in uncertainty, I heard a faint rustling outside the cabin. It was a soft, deliberate sound, like someone was trying to get my attention. Elijah's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. "It's him," he whispered. "He's here." I felt a chill run down my spine as I heard the rustling sound again, this time louder and more deliberate. It was as if the stranger was trying to taunt me, to let me know that he was out there, waiting for me. Elijah's eyes were fixed on the door, his face pale and tense. "We have to get out of here," he whispered. "Now." I nodded, my heart racing with fear. We grabbed our backpacks and made a run for the door, but as we reached it, I heard the sound of footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate. The stranger was right outside, waiting for us. Elijah's eyes met mine, and I saw a flash of desperation in his gaze. "We have to get away from here," he whispered. "We have to find a place to hide." I nodded, my mind racing with fear. We burst out of the cabin, sprinting into the darkness of the forest. The stranger was right behind us, his footsteps pounding the earth as he chased after us. We ran for what felt like hours, our breath coming in ragged gasps as we dodged trees and leapt over roots. But no matter how fast we ran, the stranger was always right behind us, his presence looming over us like a specter. Finally, we saw a glimmer of light up ahead, a small clearing surrounded by a ring of tall trees. We sprinted towards it, our hearts pounding with fear. As we reached the clearing, I saw that it was surrounded by a small stream, its crystal-clear waters babbling and chattering over smooth rocks. Elijah and I exchanged a desperate glance, and then we leapt into the stream, wading through its icy waters as we tried to lose the stranger in the darkness. But as we looked back, I saw the stranger standing on the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on us with an unspeakable hunger. And I knew that we were far from safe. We waded through the stream, our feet numb from the icy water. Elijah and I didn't dare look back, fearing what we might see. Instead, we kept our eyes fixed on the path ahead, our hearts pounding with fear. As we walked, the stream began to narrow, its waters rushing faster and faster. We had to cling to each other to avoid being swept away. Just when we thought we couldn't go any further, the stream opened up into a small waterfall. We stumbled out of the water, gasping for breath. Elijah grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. "We have to keep moving," he whispered. "He'll find us if we stay here." I nodded, my heart still racing from our narrow escape. We took off, sprinting through the forest as fast as we could. As we ran, I could feel the stranger's presence closing in around us. I knew he was gaining on us, and I didn't know how much longer we could keep this up. Just when I thought we were going to collapse from exhaustion, Elijah spotted a small cave up ahead. "In there," he shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the cave. We stumbled inside, gasping for breath. The cave was small, but it was dark and quiet, and for a moment we felt safe. But as we caught our breath, I realized that we weren't alone in the cave. I heard a faint rustling sound, like something was moving in the shadows. Elijah heard it too, and his eyes met mine in a flash of fear. "What was that?" he whispered. I shook my head, my heart pounding with fear. "I don't know," I whispered back. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. It was a figure, tall and imposing, and it was coming straight for us. My heart was racing as I turned to face the figure. Elijah was right behind me, his eyes fixed on the figure with a mix of fear and determination. As the figure stepped closer, I saw that it was the stranger. His eyes were fixed on us, his face twisted into a snarl. "You can't escape me," he growled, his voice low and menacing. Elijah and I backed away, our eyes fixed on the stranger. We knew we had to get out of there, but the stranger was blocking our way. Suddenly, Elijah made a move. He darted to the side, trying to get around the stranger, but the stranger was too quick. He grabbed Elijah's arm, his grip like a vice. I knew I had to act fast. I launched myself at the stranger, trying to pry his grip off Elijah's arm. But the stranger was too strong. He tossed me aside like a rag doll, sending me crashing to the ground. As I struggled to get to my feet, I saw the stranger's eyes fixed on Elijah. I knew I had to do something. But what? And then I remembered the words Elijah had spoken earlier. "He's not human," he had said. "He's something else." I realized that the stranger wasn't just a man. He was something supernatural, something that couldn't be defeated by ordinary means. I knew I had to think outside the box. I had to come up with a plan that would take into account the stranger's supernatural abilities. As I struggled to my feet, I saw the stranger's eyes fixed on Elijah. I knew I had to act fast. I took a deep breath, and then I made my move. I remembered the words Elijah had spoken earlier about the stranger not being human. I realized that I had to use that knowledge to my advantage. As the stranger's eyes were fixed on Elijah, I slowly backed away, trying not to draw attention to myself. I knew I had to come up with a plan, and fast. That's when I remembered the small pouch of salt that I had in my backpack. I had brought it with me as a good luck charm, but now I realized that it could be used for something more. I slowly made my way back to my backpack, trying not to make any sudden movements that would alert the stranger. I rummaged through my backpack, my hands shaking as I searched for the pouch of salt. Finally, I found it. I slowly made my way back to the stranger, the pouch of salt clutched in my hand. As I approached, the stranger's eyes flicked towards me, and I could see a glimmer of curiosity in his gaze. But he didn't move, his attention still fixed on Elijah. I took a deep breath, and then I threw the salt at the stranger. It hit him right in the face, and he let out a loud roar of rage. The stranger stumbled backwards, momentarily blinded by the salt. Elijah took advantage of the distraction, breaking free from the stranger's grip. "Run!" Elijah shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the cave entrance. We sprinted out of the cave, not stopping until we were back in the forest, gasping for breath. As we looked back at the cave, we saw the stranger standing in the entrance, his eyes fixed on us with an unspeakable hatred. "We have to keep moving," Elijah said, his voice low and urgent. "We can't let him catch us again." I nodded, my heart still racing with fear. We took off, sprinting through the forest as fast as we could, but as we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded towards some unknown destination, that the stranger was just a pawn in a much larger game, and I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead, waiting for us in the darkness. As we ran, the forest seemed to grow denser and darker, the trees twisting and turning around us like living shadows. I could feel the stranger's eyes on us, boring into our skin like cold, hard needles. Elijah and I didn't dare look back, fearing what we might see. Instead, we kept our eyes fixed on the path ahead, our hearts pounding in our chests like drums. Suddenly, Elijah grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Do you hear that?" I listened, and after a moment I heard it too, a faint rustling sound, like leaves or fabric moving in the wind. "It's coming from up ahead," Elijah whispered, his eyes fixed on the path. I nodded, my heart racing with fear. We crept forward, our senses on high alert, as the rustling sound grew louder and closer. And then suddenly, we saw it, a figure, tall and imposing, standing in the center of the path. It was the stranger, his eyes fixed on us with an unspeakable hunger. But this time, he was different. His body seemed to be shifting, like a living shadow. Elijah and I froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. We knew we had to get away, but our legs seemed rooted to the spot. The stranger began to move towards us, his body flowing like a liquid. We knew we had to act fast or risk being consumed by this monstrous creature. And then, in a flash of inspiration, Elijah remembered the words of an old legend, a legend that spoke of a way to banish creatures like the stranger back to the depths of hell. "Salt and fire," Elijah whispered, his eyes locked on the stranger. "We need salt and fire to banish him." I nodded, my heart racing with fear. We knew it was a long shot, but it was our only hope. With a deep breath, we steeled ourselves and prepared to face the stranger. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to survive this nightmare and make it out alive. As Elijah and I stood our ground, ready to face the stranger, we rummaged through our backpacks, searching for the salt and fire we needed to banish him. Elijah pulled out a small bag of salt, while I retrieved a lighter from my backpack. We stood side by side, ready to face the stranger, as we began to chant the words of the ancient legend. "Salt and fire, we call upon thee, to banish this evil, back to hell's decree." As we spoke the words, the air around us began to shift and swirl. The stranger's eyes grew wide with fear as he stumbled backward, away from us. Suddenly, a blast of flame erupted from the ground, engulfing the stranger and sending him stumbling backward. The flames danced and flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees around us, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A massive 10-foot-tall dogman cryptid emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The creature was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its body was a twisted mix of canine and human features, with razor-sharp claws and teeth. As the creature approached, the stranger let out a blood-curdling scream before turning and fleeing in terror. The creature gave chase, its massive strides eating up the distance between them. Elijah and I watched in awe as the creature pursued the stranger, its jaws snapping wildly as it gained on its prey. And then, in a flash of insight, I realized what was happening. The creature was not just a mindless beast, it was a supernatural entity, summoned by our words and actions to fulfill a specific purpose. As I watched, the creature caught up to the stranger, its jaws closing around his waist like a vice. The stranger let out a scream of agony before being dragged backward into the depths of the forest. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything was silent. The flames died down, the creature vanished, and the stranger was gone. Elijah and I stood there, stunned and shaken, as the reality of what we had just witnessed sank in. We had summoned a supernatural creature, a dogman cryptid, to banish the stranger back to hell. And it had worked. But as we stood there, trying to process what we had just seen, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just unleashed a new kind of terror into the world.